The word integer refers to a whole number that could be positive or it could be negative. And the reason that we have to talk about a situation where we have both positive and negative is that there are plenty of real-world examples where we have things that would be considered opposites. So up versus down, left versus right, east versus west, etc. Having that idea of opposites occur in real life means that we need to be able to take into account any sort of measurements that might have some sort of opposite situation. So being able to say go left versus go right, being able to say go up versus go down, and have some measurements going along with those. We want those measurements to be written down as quickly as possible and have something nice and short and simple. So the opposite of, well, we want to be able to shorten that up. So symbolically, we use what looks like a minus symbol, but we would read that as negative x. So the opposite would be represented either as a negative or possibly as a positive, depending on what it is we might have started out with. If we start out with a 1, the opposite would be negative 1. If we start out with a 7, the opposite would be negative 7. If we started out with a negative 23, the opposite would be a positive 23. We don't need to have a symbol for that word positive. I've just said that as a matter of emphasis. So we can give a little bit more technical definition for the integers as being the set of all of the whole numbers that we're used to dealing with, and now throw into the mix all of their opposites, so all of the negative versions of the whole numbers that we're now used to dealing with. As far as some useful meanings for the positive and the negative numbers. Positive numbers, up, north, right, having money, as well as other examples. Negative numbers could be used for, well, all the opposites of those. The opposite of up is down, the opposite of north is south, the opposite of right is left, the opposite of having money is owing money. And again, there are other examples that we could use as well. Those will be useful to us when we start working through problems and trying to figure out how to deal with those negative numbers that might show up in our calculations. Well, let's talk about ordering things first, make sure that we've got all of our basics, all of our introductory elements squared away. So as far as our number line, what we're used to from whole numbers is that we would have started with 0, and our whole numbers would move off to the right, getting larger and larger. Now remember that we're now throwing in the opposites, so the opposite of going to the right is going to the left. The opposite of getting bigger is getting smaller. So as weird as that might seem, when we start throwing numbers onto that number line, the farther we go to the left, the more negative, it's actually smaller. So smaller and smaller and smaller. The further we go to the left, the smaller we get. If I take one step to the right, the opposite of that is one step to the left. So the first negative number that we would see as we start moving away from 0 is going to be that negative 1. Take another step to the left, negative 2. We can also say that, like a mirror does opposites, if we put a mirror right there with the 0, the left-hand side and the right-hand sides are mirror images. So that right-hand side that we're used to, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. The mirror image of that, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, etc. So we have that basic way of presenting things on a number line and that basic kind of ordering idea. The further to the right that we go, the bigger we get, normal. The new part, the further to the left we go, the smaller we get. The absolute value is something that has a connection with the number line. As far as its official definition, the absolute value of a number is referred to as the distance from that number to 0 on the number line. So if I plopped you down at a spot on your number line and told you to walk to the 0, you're basically going to count the number of steps that you would walk. So if I plop you down at 17 and tell you to walk back to 0, you're going to just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I've landed on 0, and so the answer that you would be presenting, the number of steps that you walked, would be 17. Well, if all we're doing is counting the number of steps, then it doesn't matter where I plop you down on the number line. You're just going to start counting steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Which basically means that no matter what number we have inside of the absolute value bars, we're going to take that inside number, we're going to turn it positive. Well, if it's already positive, there we go. If the number that's inside of those absolute value bars is a negative number, then we turn that positive. And that gives us a very short and direct way of working out an absolute value that shows up either by itself or eventually as part of a larger calculation. Now, beyond these introductory elements, we're going to have adding and subtracting, multiplying and dividing. So for right now, we'll go ahead and deal with adding and subtracting. Try not to give too much away there. Just kind of hide that very bottom line I accidentally brought up. We're going to look at some of the more basic sorts of adding and subtracting problems. And rather than having to remember a bunch of technical rules, technical phrases, things that we might misremember or accidentally turn around, it's maybe more helpful for us to think of money. We all like money, so there's that advantage over math. We also have a great many more years of experience working with money than we have likely had working with math. So taking advantage of that experience and that more positive attitude, money can help us work our way through these adding and subtracting problems and give us a better chance of getting the correct answer. I want to look at things, again, in a very simple and sort of direct fashion. So when I look at a problem like this one, officially, mathematically, I would read 13 minus 6, but to put things in terms of money, I would want to say to myself, well, the first number that shows up is a 13. The 13 is a positive number, so to keep things very simple, I have $13. Now go ahead and cover up that 13 that I just used, and if I look at what shows up next looks like a negative number by itself. It looks like a negative 6. And negative numbers I relate to owing money. So I would say that I owe $6. Now if I think about this and consider my own practical experience with money, if I have $13 and I owe somebody 6, I go ahead and I pay them what I owe, what I now have let's use a different color. I now have is going to be based on, well, we started with 13, we went ahead and paid off 6, we've got 7, it's literally money that we have. I have 7. So having money means positive. So our final answer here, positive 7. When we look at the next example, again, we kind of use that very direct sort of idea of figuring out what the money version of this math problem is. Mathematically, 13 plus negative 6. Well, let me go ahead and just look at things. Start out with the first number that I see, which is 13. 13 is positive, so I have $13. I go ahead and cover up the 13, and the plus isn't doing anything for me. Basically, the next number that I see here looks like a -6. So I owe $6. Well, this is the same money statement that we just gave. So it has the same answer that we just determined. I have $7, which means that my math answer, have means positive, so +7. The next example, also again, trying to keep things as simple and direct as possible. The very first number that I see is a -25. Negative number means I owe money, so I owe $25. I'm going to go ahead and uncover that up, and what I see after the 25 there is a +10. I don't care so much about the plus as I care about the 10 literally being a positive number. Positive numbers meaning that I have money. So I owe 25 and I have $10. Considering my money experience, what this means is that I've been able to pay off some, but not all, of my debt. So I will still owe money. Well, I also need to figure out how much money I owe, so I think about, and if I need to, write it off to the side. Well, I start out with a debt of 25, and because I'm able to pay off $10, I'm going to still have a debt of $15. When we owe money, we will have a negative answer, so the answer -15. I don't have to literally write down these money statements, but it can sometimes be a good idea if you find yourself making too many mistakes about having a positive answer when you should have had a negative answer, or vice versa. So, you find yourself making too many of those kinds of mistakes, maybe take that little extra bit of time and write something along the lines of this, or a shorthand version of it. I owe such and such, I have such and such. Help yourself keep track of things. So for instance, if we're going to work this problem out, without writing anything down, we'd still want to think about the money version of this problem. The first number that we have is an 80. So I have $80. Cover up that 80, and the very next thing I see looks like a -120. So I think that in terms of money and say to myself, I owe $120. Without writing any sort of extra money statement down, I have $80. I owe $120. Overall, I will still owe, which means my answer will be a negative answer. If I need to do a little extra work off to the side to figure things out, I would want to work out the 120 minus the 80 to give me the rest of that answer. How much money do I owe? Well, I owe 40. So my final answer there, -40. This gets us through most of our adding and subtracting problems. However, there is one technical element to worry about, and that is when we have in the middle of a calculation a negative followed by a parentheses followed by another negative. That's the way that it appears. And what's happening is that overall, those two negatives would combine together and give us a positive. You could think of things in a little bit more realistic way. If you say to somebody, I don't hate pizza, that's just the long way of saying that you actually like or maybe even love pizza. So the don't is a negative word, the hate is a negative word, and those two negatives together truly mean a positive idea that you like or love pizza. So the two negatives that we see in the middle here really coming together to give us a plus. We want to look for this first before we think about the money problem. Read through your problem and look for any of that double negative business. If you see any double negative business, replace that double negative, the minus, parentheses, negative. It's a more technical way of reading through that. Replace the minus, parentheses, negative with a plus sign. For those of you that are a little bit more visual, if you actually look at those three symbols, the minus, the parentheses, the negative, and you kind of just lose your focus and kind of have those three symbols blend together, they look like a bit of a saggy plus sign. So that's another way of kind of getting a feel for what's happening. We read through this particular example, we see that in the middle we have that minus, parenthesis, negative showing up. So in working through this problem, what I want to do first is go ahead and replace the minus, parentheses, negative, as though when I'm copying that down, replace those three symbols with the big old slap you in the face plus sign. And now I no longer need that extra random parenthesis after the number 200, so I go ahead and erase that. And I have a much more direct looking problem to work with. Now that that extra technical junk in the middle here has been cleaned up, now I can think of the money version of this problem and try to work out my answer. I owe 124, positive, plus sign, 200, positive 200, basically meaning that I have 200. So I owe 124, I have 200. Using my practical experience with money, I recognize that I will have money left over. And again, off to the side, I can work out if I need to, that if I work out a little bit of subtraction here, I can come up with my final answer. Having money means positive answer. I will get 76. So I have $76. My math answer is a positive 76. Reading through the next example, we also see the minus, parentheses, negative as we are actually reading it to ourselves. So copying things down and converting that minus, parentheses, negative, what we would be looking at doing is combining the minus, parentheses, negative into a big old slap me in the face plus sign. Get rid of that extra parenthesis after the 827. And now start looking at things and saying, how would the money version of this all play out? Well, the money version of this is going to play out in two parts. One way of working through things would be to just take care of the first pair of numbers and see how things go. We owe 1,009. We have 827. So overall, what's going to be going on here is that we will still owe some money. And we can work off, let's just go ahead and keep it in blue. We can work off to the side. We have our 1,009. If we pay off 827, then what do we get? We're going to have 182. Then we still have that plus negative 53 to deal with. So if we owe 182, cover that up, plus sign, don't care about that. Really the next number that I see is a negative. So I owe 53. I owe 182, I owe 53, which means that overall, I will owe money. Off to the side, I take that 182. I'm going to add to that my new debt, my new $53 debt. And when I go ahead and add those together, we're going to have $235. So overall, our answer here, negative $235.